The night sky burned with streaks of fire as Ryan's shuttle tore through the atmosphere of the unknown planet. Sparks flew across the panels and warning alarms screamed in his ears. He held the controls tightly, fighting to keep the small ship steady. The hull shook with violent force, and he knew there was no chance of landing safely. All he could do was try to survive the crash. The shuttle hit the ground with a thunderous roar. Metal screeched and the world spun into a blur. When the dust finally settled, silence returned. Ryan lay strapped in his seat, his body aching from the impact. His head throbbed, but he was alive. The cockpit was filled with smoke, and the once reliable systems were now dead. He unbuckled himself and crawled out of the wreck. The air outside was heavy but breathable. Strange stars shone above, different from the skies of Earth. He looked around at the dark forest stretching in every direction. Towering trees with wide glowing leaves swayed in the breeze. Small lights moved among the branches, like living lanterns. Ryan felt both fear and wonder. This was not a world he had ever studied. It was wild, untouched, and mysterious. He checked his supplies. A few emergency rations, a broken scanner, and a survival knife were all he had managed to save. The communicator was useless, no signal would reach Earth from this distance. He was truly alone. Ryan's stomach growled. He had only a handful of food packs, not enough to last more than a week. He would need to find something to eat and drink soon. He started walking, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. Every sound in the forest made him tense. The chirping of unseen creatures echoed around him, and now and then, he felt as if eyes were watching him from the shadows. Hours passed as he searched for shelter. At last, he found a small cave at the base of a hill. The inside was dry and cool, with no sign of dangerous animals. Exhausted, Ryan decided to rest there for the night. He built a small fire using broken branches, its glow pushing back the darkness. As the flames rose, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He was stranded, yes, but he was still alive. That meant there was still hope. Sleep did not come easily. The sounds of the strange forest kept him awake. At one point, he thought he saw movement near the entrance of the cave, a tall shadow slipping between the trees. He grabbed his knife and waited, but nothing came. Perhaps it was only his imagination, or perhaps something truly was out there. Either way, he could not relax. When morning came, the forest revealed its beauty. Sunlight passed through the glowing leaves, painting the ground with shifting colors of green and gold. Strange flowers opened with soft hums, releasing sweet scents into the air. Insects with transparent wings drifted lazily from one bloom to another. For a moment, Ryan almost forgot his fear. He whispered to himself that the world was alive, almost magical. But beauty did not fill his stomach. He searched for food, testing fruits carefully, remembering the survival training that warned of poisons. He found one plant that seemed safe and ate cautiously. It was bitter but gave him strength to continue. As he wandered further, Ryan noticed something that froze him in place. At the edge of the forest stood tall stones, carved with patterns too precise to be natural. Lines and curves marked their surface, glowing faintly under the sunlight. These were not the work of nature. They were the work of intelligence. His heart raced. He was not alone on this world. Somewhere beyond the trees, there were beings who built these stones. Questions swirled in his mind. Were they friendly or hostile? Would they accept him or see him as a threat? He stepped closer, tracing his fingers over the carvings. The marks pulsed faintly, as if reacting to his touch. He pulled his hand back quickly. The thought that someone might have seen him sent a chill down his spine. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound he could not mistake. It was a voice, low and strong, speaking in a language he did not know. He turned sharply, scanning the forest, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. Ryan's instincts told him to retreat to the cave, but his curiosity kept him rooted. Somewhere in those trees, someone had spoken. Somewhere in this land, life existed beyond plants and animals. He was not simply a castaway, he was a stranger in someone else's home. As the day passed, he remained alert, his senses sharp. The fire of survival burned in his chest, but so did something else, an uneasy excitement. His crash had left him broken and alone, yet it had also placed him on the edge of discovery. The sun dipped low, shadows stretched across the forest, and Ryan returned to his cave. He sat by the fading fire and whispered to himself that tomorrow he would search again. He needed food, he needed safety, but above all, he needed to know who had carved those stones. For in his heart, he understood the truth. Somewhere out there, he was being watched. And sooner or later, he would meet the ones who lived on this world. Ryan woke early the next morning, his body stiff from sleeping on the cold cave floor. He rubbed his eyes and stepped outside. The forest was alive with sound. Birds with wide wings glided overhead, their calls echoing across the trees. Small creatures darted through the undergrowth, quick and cautious. The world looked calm, yet Ryan could not shake the memory of the voice he had heard the night before. He decided to return to the strange stones. If there were people living here, he needed to find them. He could not survive long on his own. His food packs were running low, and although he had found a few edible plants, he knew he would need more. He also wanted answers. The carvings on those stones had not been made by chance. They were proof of intelligence. As he walked, he listened carefully. The forest was full of sounds, but every now and then he thought he heard footsteps. They were soft, almost blending with the wind, but he knew they were real. Someone was following him. He gripped his survival knife tightly, though he doubted it would help much against an unknown being. When he reached the stones again, he stopped and studied them in daylight. They formed a circle, each standing taller than him. The carvings glowed faintly as if the stones were alive. He touched one carefully, and again the lines brightened under his hand. That was when he heard the sound of movement behind him. He spun around, knife raised. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure. Tall, graceful, and unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, reflecting the light like polished stone. Her eyes glowed softly, sharp and filled with suspicion. She wore simple clothes made of woven fibers, but she carried a long staff that looked both ceremonial and dangerous. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then she spoke. The words were firm, in a language Ryan could not understand. Her voice was not harsh, but it carried power, as if demanding an answer. Ryan lowered his knife slowly, showing he meant no harm. I am not your enemy, he said, though he knew she would not understand. He placed the knife on the ground and raised his empty hands. Her eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, staff pointed toward him. She repeated her words, this time louder. Ryan could hear the edge of anger in her tone. She thought he was a threat. He pointed to his broken communicator, then to the sky, hoping to show her he had come from above by accident. He mimed crashing, spreading his hands like falling, then touching the ground. For a moment, she simply stared. Then her eyes widened slightly, as if she understood part of his message. Still, her face remained hard. She said something sharp, and before Ryan could react, she swung her staff to the ground with a heavy thud. He froze, unsure of what she would do next. His heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. He stepped back slowly, lowering his head in what he hoped would look like respect. The woman watched him carefully. She did not strike, but she did not lower her staff either. Finally, she gestured for him to move. She pointed toward the forest, then back at him. It was clear she wanted him to follow. Ryan hesitated. He did not know if this was a trap, but he had little choice. Alone, he would not last long. If these people had food, water, and shelter, he needed their help. So he followed her into the forest. The walk was silent except for the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. She moved with grace, never stumbling, while Ryan struggled to keep up. Every so often she glanced back at him, her expression still filled with suspicion. After some time, they reached a hidden path. It wound between tall trees and opened into a wide valley. There, nestled against the hills, was a village. Dozens of structures stood in neat rows, built from wood and stone. People moved about, carrying baskets, tending fires, and speaking in the same strange language. When the villagers saw Ryan, they stopped what they were doing. Their eyes widened, and whispers spread quickly. Some looked fearful, others angry. A few children hid behind their parents. The woman who had brought him stepped forward and spoke loudly to the crowd. Her voice carried across the valley, strong and commanding. Ryan realized she must hold some authority here. But her people did not seem pleased. Several men picked up spears, and one shouted angrily. Ryan could not understand their words, but the meaning was clear. They did not want him there. Ryan raised his hands again, trying to show he meant no harm. His heart pounded as the tension grew. For a moment, he feared they would attack. The woman spoke again, louder this time, striking her staff against the ground. The crowd grew quiet. Though their eyes still burned with suspicion, they did not move closer. Ryan stood still, sweat running down his back. He knew he was at their mercy. Whatever happened next depended on the woman who had brought him here. She turned her eyes to him, filled with fire and caution. Her first reaction was clear anger at his presence. But behind that anger was something else, a spark of curiosity. Ryan did not know it yet, but this was the beginning of something far greater than survival. The village grew silent as Ryan stood among the strangers. Dozens of eyes watched him, filled with distrust. Children peeked from behind their parents, whispering in voices he could not understand. The men gripping their spears looked ready to strike if he made one wrong move. The woman who had brought him stood firm in front of him. Her staff rested against the ground, but her posture was tense, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Her name was Nira, though Ryan did not know it yet. To him, she was the first being he had met on this strange world, and he could already sense her strength. She spoke loudly to the people, her voice steady and commanding. Ryan could not make sense of the words, but he understood the weight of her tone. She was defending her choice to bring him here, even though her people clearly disagreed. One man stepped forward, pointing his spear toward Ryan, shouting angrily. The villagers murmured in agreement. Ryan's heart raced, but he kept his hands raised and his eyes lowered, showing he was not a threat. He remembered his training. Fear could turn dangerous if answered with panic. He needed to remain calm. Nira raised her staff and struck the ground, silencing the crowd. Her voice grew louder, filled with fire. The villagers still looked uneasy, but they obeyed her command. The man with the spear pulled back reluctantly, his eyes still filled with distrust. At last, Nira gestured toward Ryan, motioning for him to follow her. She led him through the village while people stepped aside, whispering behind their hands. Their gazes burned into his back, making him feel like an outsider, a stranger who did not belong. Nira guided him to a small open space near the center of the settlement. She pointed to the ground, signaling for him to sit. Ryan obeyed without resistance. She then called out to the villagers, and several came forward, bringing ropes made of braided fibers. Before Ryan understood what was happening, they bound his wrists and ankles. The ropes were not cruelly tight, but they were strong enough to keep him from moving freely. He did not resist. He knew fighting would only make things worse. Instead, he kept his eyes on Nira, searching her expression for any sign of mercy. Her gaze was hard. Her first reaction was anger, and that anger still lingered. She saw him as a possible danger, an unknown force that had fallen from the sky. But even in her stern eyes, there was a hint of thoughtfulness, as if she was not yet certain what to do with him. The villagers left him under watch while Nira went to speak with the elders. They sat in a circle near a large fire, their voices calm but filled with concern. Ryan could not understand their words, but he could hear the doubt in their tone. Some gestured toward him, shaking their heads. Others spoke slower, more carefully, perhaps considering another option. While he waited, Ryan studied the village. The homes were built of stone and wood, their roofs covered in wide leaves that shimmered faintly in the light. The people moved with quiet purpose, carrying water, tending to fires, and weaving cloth. This was no primitive camp but a community shaped by tradition and skill. Yet even as he watched, the stares continued. Every glance reminded him he did not belong here. His chest felt heavy with loneliness. On Earth, he had been one of many explorers. Here, he was a prisoner in a place that feared him. As the sun lowered, Nira returned. She approached him slowly, staff in hand, and knelt so her eyes were level with his. She spoke firmly, her tone sharp. Though he could not understand her words, he could guess their meaning. She was warning him. She did not trust him, and if he made one mistake, the villagers would not hesitate to remove him. Ryan nodded slowly, showing he understood. He lowered his head in submission. He wanted her to see that he did not come to harm them, that he was only trying to survive. For a moment, her gaze softened, just slightly. Then she stood and ordered the guards to bring him food. A bowl was placed in front of him, filled with a thick stew made from roots and herbs. It was not much, but it was warm. Ryan ate carefully, grateful for the kindness, however small it was. The villagers watched him closely, as though expecting him to reveal his true nature with every bite. When night came, they tied him to a post near the fire. He sat in silence, staring at the flames. The sounds of the village drifted around him, the laughter of children, the soft voices of families, the rhythm of a people united. He felt like a shadow among them, unwanted yet unable to leave. As he looked at the sky, dotted with strange stars, Ryan whispered to himself that he would endure. He would prove he was not their enemy. He would survive not only for himself but also to show them he meant no harm. In the shadows, Nira watched him. Her heart was torn between caution and curiosity. Fear and anger still guided her, but deep inside, a question had taken root. Could this stranger truly be different from the others they had once known? The night grew quiet, but the tension remained. Ryan slept in ropes, and Nira guarded her people's safety with sharp eyes. Neither knew that this uneasy beginning was only the first step towards something that would change both of their lives forever. The night passed slowly for Ryan. He slept in short moments, waking often to the crackling fire and the watchful eyes of guards. The ropes around his wrists rubbed his skin raw, but he did not complain. He knew they tied him not out of cruelty but out of fear. When dawn came, the village stirred to life. Smoke rose from the cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter echoed faintly through the air. For a moment, Ryan forgot his troubles and simply watched the simple beauty of the morning. Then Nira approached. Her staff tapped against the ground as she walked. She looked at him with sharp eyes, but her expression was less hard than before. She gave a short command, and the guards loosened his ropes, though they did not remove them completely. Ryan stretched his arms, feeling some relief. She handed him a piece of flat bread made from grain. He accepted it with quiet gratitude, bowing his head slightly. Though her face did not change, he noticed the faintest pause in her movements, as if she was surprised by his gesture of respect. The day seemed ordinary until the sky grew heavy with dark clouds. A strong wind swept through the valley, bending trees and carrying dust into the air. The villagers moved quickly, securing their homes and gathering supplies. Ryan watched as roofs of wide leaves flapped dangerously, threatening to tear away. One hut near the edge of the settlement shook violently. A woman cried out, trying to hold the roof down with her bare hands while children clung to her sides. The guards who watched Ryan looked uncertain, torn between keeping him tied and helping their people. Without waiting, Ryan pushed himself up. The rope still bound his ankles, but he moved as fast as he could. He shouted, pointing toward the hut, then bent to grab a fallen branch. Using it as support, he hobbled across the ground until he reached the struggling family. The woman looked at him with fear, but Ryan did not stop. He braced the wall of the hut with his shoulder, pressing with all his strength. The wind howled, tearing at his clothes, but he did not let go. Using his knowledge from Earth, he shouted and gestured to the woman, showing her how to place heavier stones against the base of the walls. Soon, others arrived. At first, they hesitated to work beside him, but when Nira gave a sharp command, they obeyed. Together they reinforced the hut, tying ropes across the roof and placing more stones around the walls. Slowly, the structure held steady against the storm. By the time the wind began to ease, the people were exhausted, but the village was safe. Not a single home had been lost. The villagers gathered in the open space, breathing heavily, their faces filled with relief. Ryan stood apart from them, chest rising and falling with effort. His arms ached, and dust clung to his skin, but he felt no regret. He had done what he could to help. He only hoped they would see it. Nira stepped forward. Her eyes were fixed on him, not with anger this time, but with something deeper. She spoke softly, almost as if she was thinking aloud. Though Ryan could not understand her words, he sensed a change. She was no longer looking at him as a danger but as someone worth watching closely. The villagers whispered among themselves. Some nodded in approval, while others still frowned with doubt. Yet none could deny what they had seen. The stranger had helped save their homes, even while bound by ropes. Later, when the storm fully passed, Nira gave another command. The guards untied his wrists, leaving only a loose rope around his waist. It was a sign of trust, however small. Ryan rubbed his sore arms and gave a small nod of thanks. He wished he could speak their language, tell them he meant no harm, but for now, his actions would have to speak in his place. As evening fell, the villagers gathered for a meal. Ryan was given a bowl of stew, richer than before. He ate slowly, listening to the voices around him. The people no longer looked at him with only suspicion. Some looked with curiosity, others with cautious respect. Nira sat nearby, watching him carefully. Her staff rested across her knees, but her eyes were not as cold as before. She studied him, trying to read the truth in his every move. Ryan returned her gaze briefly, then lowered his eyes in humility. When the night grew quiet, he sat near the fire, his thoughts heavy. He was still a stranger, still trapped far from home, but something inside him felt lighter. He had shown them he could help, that he could care for others even without reward. Perhaps, he thought, this was the first step toward earning their trust. Far across the fire, Nira watched in silence. Her heart wrestled with doubt. Her people had suffered long ago because of outsiders, and anger was the shield she had always carried. Yet today, she had seen something she had not expected. The stranger had risked himself for her people. Her anger did not vanish, but it cracked, just a little. And in that small crack, a new question grew. Could this man truly be different the days after the storm passed more calmly? Ryan was no longer tied every hour of the day. The rope around his waist remained, but it was loose, more a symbol of caution than a prison. He could walk through parts of the village, though always under the watchful eyes of guards. The villagers still looked at him with suspicion, yet their fear seemed weaker than before. Children watched him with curiosity, sometimes daring to follow him from a distance. When he bent down to show them how he could make fire faster with sparks from stones, they laughed and clapped, though their parents quickly pulled them away. Nira remained his closest watcher. She carried her staff at all times, her eyes sharp, but she no longer treated him with the same anger as before. She often studied him in silence, as if weighing every action. Ryan, in turn, tried his best to show respect. He ate the food they gave him without complaint, worked when asked, and never raised his voice. He hoped, one day, to prove that he was no enemy. But peace did not last. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the villagers prepared their fires, a strange cry echoed from the forest. It was a deep, throaty sound, filled with hunger. The villagers froze at once. Mothers pulled children inside, and men armed themselves with spears. Ryan looked around, confused. He had heard many strange sounds in this world, but this one was different. It carried danger in every note. The cry came again, closer this time. From the tree line, dark shapes moved. Eyes glowed in the shadows, and low growls filled the air. Then, without warning, the creatures attacked. They were massive beasts, their bodies covered in thick fur and their jaws lined with sharp teeth. They moved on four legs but were taller than a man, their claws slicing the earth as they charged. The villagers shouted, rushing to defend their homes. Spears flew, striking the first of the beasts, but more followed. The creatures leapt at the walls of huts, tearing at the wood and leaves. Panic spread as families ran for safety. Ryan acted without thinking. He grabbed a fallen spear from the ground and ran toward the nearest hut. Inside, he heard children crying. One of the beasts had pinned the doorway, snarling as it clawed at the roof. With a shout, Ryan struck the spear against its side. The beast turned on him, its glowing eyes burning with fury. Ryan's arms trembled, but he held the spear firm as the creature lunged. At the last moment, he drove the point into its chest. The force knocked him backward, but the beast howled and staggered away, bleeding heavily before collapsing. The children inside the hut screamed, but their cries were now mixed with relief. Ryan pulled them out quickly, guiding them toward the center of the village where the guards were forming a line. Another beast charged at him. Ryan tried to ready the spear again, but this one was faster. Before it could strike, Nira leapt between them, her staff glowing faintly as she swung it with incredible strength. The blow cracked against the beast's skull, sending it stumbling. Together, Ryan and Nira finished it, striking again and again until the creature collapsed. The battle raged on. The villagers fought bravely, and with Ryan's help, they began to push the beasts back. Finally, after what felt like endless chaos, the creatures gave up and fled into the forest, leaving behind silence and heavy breathing. The ground was scattered with broken spears and torn earth. A few huts were damaged, but the people were alive. Families clung to one another, whispering prayers of thanks. Ryan stood among them, his chest heaving. His arms were scratched, his clothes torn, but he was alive. More importantly, so were the children he had saved. Nira approached him, her staff still in hand. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen before. There was no anger, no suspicion. Only surprise, and something softer beneath it. She spoke slowly, her tone no longer sharp but steady, almost gentle. Ryan could not understand her words, but he understood her eyes. She had seen him risk his life, not for himself but for her people. He had fought at their side, bled at their side, and stood his ground when he could have run. The villagers gathered, their whispers different now. No longer filled with only fear, they carried wonder. Some even nodded in quiet respect. That night, as the fires burned low, Nira brought him water and herbs for his wounds. She sat near him, not as a guard but as something closer to a companion. For the first time, She asked him a question in her language, pointing to him, then to the stars. He understood she was asking where he had come from. Ryan pointed upward, tracing the shape of a falling star with his finger. She watched closely, her expression thoughtful. Though she did not speak, he could see the doubt in her eyes slowly fading. When the night grew quiet, Nira remained nearby. Her heart still carried memories of fear, but tonight she also carried something new. Respect. Perhaps even trust. And Ryan, lying by the fire, felt a spark of hope. His place among them was not yet secure, but a door had opened. For the first time since his crash, he believed he might not face this strange world alone. The village was quiet after the attack. The air still smelled of smoke and fear, but the people moved with a new energy. They had survived, and though their homes bore scars from the beasts, their spirits were stronger. In the center of it all stood Ryan, the stranger who had fought beside them. For many villagers, their anger had softened. They had seen his courage with their own eyes. He had saved children, shielded families, and stood shoulder to shoulder with their warriors. Yet doubt did not vanish so easily. Some still whispered warnings, reminding others of past dangers brought by outsiders. Nira, however, was silent. She walked through the village, her staff tapping softly against the ground, but her mind was restless. She had watched the stranger closely since the moment he arrived. At first, she saw him as a threat. Her people had suffered once before when visitors from beyond the sky brought harm. That memory had taught her to meet the unknown with anger, to guard her people fiercely. But now, that anger was breaking. She had seen him throw himself at a beast far larger than him. She had seen him bleed for her people, even while they tied him with ropes and treated him as an outsider. His actions did not match the stories of cruelty she had carried in her heart. That evening, as the fire crackled in the center of the village, Nira approached Ryan. He sat alone, cleaning the cuts on his arms with water. The flames lit his face, showing lines of exhaustion but also quiet determination. She lowered her staff and sat across from him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, slowly, she pointed to herself and said her name. Nira. Ryan looked up, surprised. He repeated the sound carefully, Nira. Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile, though her eyes remained steady. She then pointed at him, waiting. Ryan placed a hand on his chest. Ryan. The name passed between them like a fragile bridge. For the first time, they were not just stranger and guard. They were Nira and Ryan. In the days that followed, Nira began to teach him small words. She pointed to objects: the fire, the sky, the water, and spoke their names. Ryan repeated them, sometimes clumsy, sometimes clear. The children giggled at his attempts, but even their laughter was softer now, free of fear. Through these lessons, Nira began to see his heart more clearly. He listened with patience, never mocking, never demanding. When he failed, he tried again. When he succeeded, his face lit with simple gratitude. One evening, as they sat near the edge of the forest, Nira spoke more than usual. Though Ryan understood only a little, her tone told him it was important. She pointed to the stars, her voice low and heavy. She spoke of the past, of others who had once come from the sky. Their arrival had brought sorrow, leaving wounds in her people's memory. That was why she had met him with anger, why the villagers still feared him. Ryan listened in silence. He could not answer in her tongue, but his eyes showed understanding. Slowly, he shook his head, pointing to himself, then pressing a hand to his heart. He was not the same as those who had harmed them. He was different. Nira studied him for a long time. In his gaze, she saw no lies, only honesty. She had been taught to guard her people with distrust, but now she wondered if distrust alone was not also a chain, holding her heart captive. The test of her thoughts came sooner than expected. One afternoon, while helping to repair a damaged hut, Ryan stumbled and cut his leg on a sharp stone. Blood flowed freely, and he fell to the ground. The villagers stepped back, unsure. Some muttered that perhaps this was a sign, that perhaps the stranger did not belong. But Nira did not hesitate. She dropped her staff and knelt beside him. With quick hands, she tore a strip of cloth from her garment and pressed it against his wound. Her voice was steady as she ordered water and herbs. The villagers stared, shocked at her sudden care. Ryan looked up at her, his face pale with pain, but in his eyes was a glimmer of something deeper. Gratitude. Trust. As the herbs took effect, his breathing steadied. Nira held the cloth firmly, refusing to let go until the bleeding stopped. Only then did she lift her eyes to the others, her voice sharp. She told them that this man was not like the ones before, that he had risked himself for their children, that he had fought not as an enemy but as a protector. The villagers listened. Some still doubted, but others nodded. Slowly, the fear began to shift into cautious respect. That night, when Ryan lay resting near the fire, Nira stayed by his side. She no longer stood over him as a guard but sat close, as if protecting him in return. Her hand rested lightly near his arm, and though she did not hold him fully, the gesture carried a meaning deeper than words. Her first reaction to him had been anger, but now, something stronger had taken its place. She would not say it aloud yet, but in her heart she knew. This stranger had become more than a burden. He had become someone she could not push away. And as the stars watched above, Nira held on to the thought that perhaps, for the first time, her people's future could change. The village was calmer now. The beasts had not returned, and the huts were being rebuilt stronger than before. Children laughed again in the open fields, though they often kept a cautious distance from the forest edge. Life was slowly returning to its rhythm, but for Nira, everything felt different. Each morning, she found herself looking for Ryan. She told herself it was only her duty as a guardian, but she knew in her heart it was more. His presence had changed something inside her. Where she once carried only anger and suspicion, now there was a strange warmth she could not ignore. Ryan, though still a stranger in many ways, worked alongside the villagers without complaint. He helped lift heavy beams, carried water, and learned their words little by little. The children who had once mocked him now gathered to teach him more, laughing with him instead of at him. Even the older villagers, slow to trust, began to greet him with nods of respect. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the council gathered. The elders spoke about Ryan's place among them. Some argued he should remain, for he had proven himself. Others worried he would bring danger, that the sky would send more strangers like him. Nira stood tall before them. Her voice was clear and strong. She reminded them of the night of the attack, of how Ryan had fought without hesitation. She told them of the children he saved, of the wounds he bore in their defense. Her words carried weight, for Nira was not one to speak lightly. The council fell silent. At last, the eldest among them said that Ryan had earned the right to stay, if he wished. But the choice, they added, would be his. When Ryan was told, he looked surprised. He placed a hand on his chest, then pointed toward the forest and the sky beyond. His eyes grew distant, filled with thoughts he could not explain. Nira felt her heart tighten. She understood. He still longed for his own world, for the home he had lost. That night, Nira sat by the fire, her thoughts heavy. If he chose to leave, she would not stop him. Yet the idea of watching him walk away filled her with a sorrow deeper than she expected. She remembered her first meeting with him, the anger that had burned so bright, and how it had slowly melted into something far stronger. The next day, Ryan sought her out. He carried in his hand a small object, worn and scratched. It was a piece of metal from his vessel, the only thing that had survived the crash with him. He placed it gently into her palm. His eyes met hers, steady and full of meaning. Though he spoke few words of her language, his message was clear. This was a part of his past, but he was giving it to her, trusting her with it. Nira closed her fingers around the object, her heart racing. She had never seen such a gesture before. It was as if he was saying that though he came from the stars, a part of him now belonged here, with her. Time passed, and the bond between them grew. They trained together, worked side by side, and often sat in quiet company as the night sky stretched above them. The villagers began to see them not as guardian and stranger but as two souls bound by trust. Yet the true test came when a new threat appeared. A smaller beast, driven by hunger, crept near the village one night. The alarm was raised, and warriors rushed to defend their homes. Ryan was among them, though his leg still carried the scar from his earlier wound. The beast lunged, its teeth snapping, but before it could strike, Ryan stepped in front of a child, shielding him. The creature's claws raked across his arm, and he stumbled. Nira was at his side in an instant. She struck the beast with her staff, driving it back until the others finished it. When the danger passed, Nira turned to Ryan. Blood ran down his arm, and his face was pale. For a moment, fear gripped her. She thought she might lose him, and the thought was unbearable. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. The villagers watched in silence. Nira, the fierce guardian who had once met this man with nothing but anger, was now holding him as if she could never let go. Her heart, which had once been a shield of stone, was now open. Ryan leaned against her, his strength fading, but his hand slowly lifted to rest against her back. Though weak, the touch was sure. It was not just gratitude but something deeper, a silent promise. The healers came, tending to his wound, but Nira refused to release him. Even as they worked, she stayed close, her arms steady around him. When he finally opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was her face, filled with a warmth she could no longer hide. Her first reaction to him had been anger, born from fear and memory. But now, as she held him close, she understood the truth. That anger had only been the beginning. Beneath it was the bond that had grown stronger than her doubts, stronger than her fears. The village would go on, and dangers would come again. But in that moment, as Nira held Ryan, she knew she would never let him face it alone. And he, in his quiet way, promised the same. The stars above shone brighter that night, as if watching over two souls who had found each other across worlds. And though their journey had begun in anger, it ended in something far greater.